Where is the international military intervention? Where is the peacekeeping force in Gaza? Where are the no-fly zones? We have to act now. Well, we're already seeing full famine. We know that actually famine and starvation reach a tipping point and that we're already there. Time is absolutely of the essence. We know that this offensive against Gaza City is likely to lead to the displacement of perhaps 1 million walking skeletons. The situation is horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. And that's why we go back to what has to be done. Essentially, there are 3 ways where the UN can use real power to change things on the ground. The first is when the Security Council votes unanimously without the veto being used. So it can vote, for instance, to send peacekeepers into the Congo. And then there is what is called the Chapter 7 resolution, peace and security. Now, this can be demanded by the Secretary General, and has been, by the way, over Gaza. And that, again, is binding on all member states to support. The reason why there hasn't been a Chapter 7 resolution calling for a militarized intervention is because of the US veto. But what hasn't happened is the United Nations General Assembly Uniting for Peace resolution, which could do just that. Now, that has to come not from the President of the United Nations General Assembly. It's got to come from members of the United Nations General Assembly. I can't believe for a moment that this hasn't been thought about, but the fact that it hasn't happened, and the fact that if it doesn't happen now, it could be too late, seems to suggest that something's missing. Something has been missed. Palestine could call for a Uniting for Peace resolution with the support of other member states who are prepared to actually carry it out. If the United Nations General Assembly was to adopt a Uniting for Peace resolution, a militarised force to go into Gaza in order to protect civilians, to provide a no-fly zone over the whole of Gaza, it would actually have to have member states who are prepared to do that. Now, which member states are prepared, and who could practically do that? The no-fly zone would probably be a much more practical and easy early solution as part of that, before you get militarised convoys going in there. But that just has to happen. Britain, as many people will have been watching, has been engaged in spy flights from its base in Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri. We've been running planes over Gaza for the best part of 2 years, sharing intelligence with the Israelis. But look, we have got that capability, the West has got that capability to put a no-fly zone around Gaza within a day or two. If a Uniting for Peace resolution was to go through, all of the materials are waiting on the Gaza border to get in. At the end of the day, it's going to be those member states of the United Nations that are not in hock to President Trump and the West, if you like, are not in hock to Israel, are not afraid of what might happen in terms of the threatened tariffs or other threats to people that could be made by the US administration, because there's a lot of that happening now. It would be great if we saw some of the European countries, Slovakia, for instance, Spain, Ireland, the countries that have been very brave and have stood up from the outset, have recognised what is happening, have called it out and have acted. I would love to see France having some involvement. It's got to be countries that can actually mobilise and get equipment in. And it's absolutely vital that the Arab League and the Arab countries play a serious role. I'm sorry, but the Arab world has really failed the Palestinians as well as the Europeans. So Egypt should have no compunction if the United Nations General Assembly decides that it's going to move humanitarian aid in, come what may. The Egyptians need to accept it and support it. There's no reason why Chinese peacekeepers couldn't be involved in the occupied Palestinian territories. In South Africa, Brazil, others have all been stepping up. They have been key behind the International Court of Justice decisions. I've got no doubt that all of those countries, that what you might call the BRICS countries, the powerful countries of the global south, possibly with the exception of India, I think all those countries would be willing to be part of a major UN operation inside Gaza. The United Nations has in many ways failed. I worked for the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. I'd actually accompanied around the globe as a journalist for Al Jazeera for some years beforehand, so I knew him quite well. And I also worked subsequently for a President of the UN General Assembly. I was very lucky in being able to report from the outside of the United Nations for a number of years, and to work inside, both for the Secretariat and for the General Assembly. So I could see the organisation, warts and all, I could see its strengths, I could see its weaknesses, but overall it's very easy for people to be dismissive of the United Nations. I think it's got a very fine track record in many, many different ways, but it is only ever as strong as its member states, in particular its 5 permanent members of the Security Council allow it to be. And what we have witnessed throughout this campaign of horror in Gaza is the use of the veto, time and time and time again. The real problem for the United Nations, not that has the UN failed? Yes, it has failed, but that's because the countries with the real power, the permanent 5, they're the ones who have failed. They failed to support the organisation they set up. Worse than that, they set about destroying it. I think the Palestinians have been failed quite clearly by those who have colluded with Israel in blocking all of those ceasefires, some 6 attempts at the Security Council. But they've also been failed by the leadership of the United Nations in many respects. Never again, but never again is happening again. And the Secretary General is not there. Now, of course, he's like the Pope. He hasn't got armies at his disposal. But you know, what he does have is the overwhelming number of UN member states on the side of international law. And I'll tell you how serious President Trump is about the United Nations and how significant the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, is. Neither have spoken at all, not once, since President Trump was elected President of the United States. The most extraordinary thing. Because we all know all of this would stop in Gaza with one phone call from President Trump, because he intervened to do just that when it came to Netanyahu's next wave of bombing of Iran. Turned his planes back mid-flight after a call from President Trump. Why hasn't the Secretary General made a public call for President Trump to do this? But you would expect him to be much more focused. He should have been in Cairo. He should have been in Amman. He should have been in Beirut. He should have been in Tehran. He should have been on the borders with Gaza with a huge humanitarian aid convoy, using the pulpit that he has to appeal to the world. I am here. We have this food. We have this water. We have these supplies. We demand entry. The key thing is that he has been given power to do all of this, because the United Nations has told Israel that it must open its borders to allow humanitarian aid in. It's been told repeatedly. It's been given deadlines. So why isn't he there? Could he not call also for the world to go to Gaza? You don't have to wait for the Egyptians to agree to open the border, or the Israelis to open the border. Why does he not call for a whole flotilla of boats to be made available? A sort of reverse Dunkirk, if you like. People from right across the region. It's dangerous. Of course it would be dangerous. Not least because we know what the Israelis are capable of and have been capable of in the past. But even if you had hundreds of boats heading to Gaza, it still would be dangerous. People are so desperate, there would be a degree of risk. So the Secretary General will have to weigh that up. I'm sorry, but humanity demands it. Humanity demands these kind of interventions. Humanity does not expect the same platitudes, whether it's from him, whether it's from von der Leyen, the head of the EU Commission, from Prime Minister Starmer, from the German Chancellor, these endless platitudes. It wants action. Now, my guess would be that if a number of countries decided to push ahead with this and to opt for a militarized humanitarian series of convoys, and the Israelis were told quite clearly by all, including all of the European countries, that they must not fire upon them, otherwise they will be fired upon back, then the Israelis would not do it. Invoke the powers that you have, and on top of that, call upon civil society right across the world to act as it only can. And so the Uniting for Peace has actually been invoked in the past, most notably over apartheid South Africa, where it called upon all member states to institute a program of full economic and military sanctions against South Africa, which most member states did, and which were instrumental in bringing apartheid South Africa to the negotiating table with Nelson Mandela on behalf of the majority population of South Africa. More significantly, it intervened when the North Koreans invaded South Korea, and the United Nations General Assembly adopted a Uniting for Peace resolution calling for a military response to the invasion. It has been in part over Palestine in telling the Israelis that they have to allow humanitarian aid in, but curiously it has not been used so far to call for a militarized intervention on behalf of the population of Gaza. Do I personally think that this is genocide? After all that I've seen, after all who I've spoken to at the United Nations? Yes. If you are deliberately setting out in the full knowledge that what you're doing is killing civilians, you're using food and water and medical supplies as weapons, and you actually don't have to look or listen that far to the genocidal intent of many of the Israeli politicians and military leaders who have talked very clearly about what their intention is in terms of getting rid of the Palestinians, getting rid of large numbers of them, and then also ethnically cleansing them, driving them somewhere elsewhere. We see AI, we see drones following medics to their tents and then killing them. And we see the agreements that Israel has with high-tech software companies such as Microsoft to store key information which they can go back to. They've got, by all accounts that we read in our media, 6 months worth of phone calls. Any phone call, any communication is all stored there for the Israelis to go back to. We understand also that by being a member of a WhatsApp group can make you a target and you can be killed. The advance of technology in warfare, we are seeing vast profits being made by companies across the world in investing in quicker and efficient ways of killing people. And we've seen some of these defence companies actually advertise their wares with using real footage of people being killed in Gaza. I'm sorry, but if this had been happening in Kurdistan or in Kosovo, we would have been hearing from Messrs. Obama, Clinton, Biden, Cameron, Starmer, the rest of them. We would have been hearing that word genocide months and months and months ago. Don't forget that within a very short period of the Russians invading Ukraine, and after some attacks on civilians outside Kiev by the Russians, Western leaders started talking about genocide in Ukraine. We're looking at people like Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the German Chancellor, who, don't forget, not so long ago saying that the IDF were doing our dirty work for us. Never forget that. Now, these people also have their own families. Do they not think that their children, their grandchildren in the future are going to turn around and say, what did you do? Because that's what a lot of the post-war German generation did to their parents. What were you doing during the war, Dad? What were you doing on the Eastern Front, Dad? So what are all these people going to say to their children and grandchildren after they put out yet another pusillanimous, pointless press release? Action is what is needed. There was never time, frankly, right from the outset, when it was very clear, when Yoav Gallant, the defence minister, was talking about Palestinians as being human animals, when they were talking about depriving Gaza of food and water and medical supplies, right from the time that they were talking about wiping Gaza off the map, it was very, very clear that tough action needed to be taken to stop this from happening. That is why, in talking about this, it's got to be a mixture of using the institutions that we have, however imperfect, and also the power of the people, civil society. Everything's got to be mobilised together. This idea that we can continue as a global community to simply watch as people starve to death, as we make more and more pleas to a ruthless, psychopathic narcissist who is Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And we think that that somehow is going to do the trick. It has a plan to move 2 million people into 12% of Gaza, and then what? And they can't leave? So what are we waiting for? We have this agency within us, and it's anybody who's been involved in any kind of political struggle in their life will know that when people come together, this is when they're strongest. And I think that agency is a very, very powerful thing. We could go back to the need for an immediate no-fly zone, the Uniting for Peace resolution going through the UN General Assembly, a coalition of the willing. It shouldn't be that difficult, actually. We've had coalitions of the willing before. It's about time that various member states just stood up and said, what is right, what is wrong? We're not going to be craven to President Trump. We're going to act. And that's what's got to happen.
Palestine Deep Dive is a very important part of our whole landscape of media in this country, because it's investigating and it's building up this whole grouping of social media and mainstream media outlets that are serious journalists, serious about going for the truth, serious about holding public authorities and public figures, even people like me, to account on what they do. So, why don't you support Palestine Deep Dive? Join in, subscribe, give them the support they deserve, and thank them for the support they give all of us who are trying to bring about a more peaceful, more just world.